Who are you? Who are you?
The blood dripped from her knuckles onto the marble floor before she even realized she was knocking. She didn't know whose door this was. She didn't know what floor she was on anymore. All she knew was that her ex-boyfriend's brother had a knife, and 3 hours ago he'd told her she had until midnight to give him the money Marcus owed. And Marcus was gone, and she had nothing. And the stairwell door had locked behind her on the 47th floor. And now she was here, bleeding, breathless, knocking on a door that wasn't hers because going back down meant walking into the lobby where they were waiting. The door opened. She didn't look up at first. She was doubled over, one hand pressed against the doorframe, the other clutching her ribs where she'd slammed into the stairwell railing. Her scrubs were torn at the knee. Her hospital badge dangled from a lanyard around her neck, the photo barely visible under smeared blood that wasn't hers and wasn't from any wound she could see. She'd been working a double shift in the ER when Marcus's brother found her in the parking garage. She'd run. She didn't know where. Up, just up. "Wrong door," she gasped. "I'm sorry, wrong." "You're bleeding." His voice was quiet, calm, the kind of calm that didn't belong to someone who just opened their door to a stranger covered in blood at midnight. She looked up. He was younger than his voice suggested. Early 30s, maybe. Black hair pushed back from his face, sharp features, dark eyes that didn't blink. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. No tie. The top button undone. He looked like he'd just come from somewhere important or was about to go somewhere that required him to look like violence in a tailored package. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I'll go." "Where?" She opened her mouth, closed it. She didn't have an answer. He glanced past her, down the hallway toward the elevator, then at the stairwell door she'd come through. His gaze moved back to her face. He took in the torn scrubs, the blood, the way she was holding her side. His expression didn't change. "Come inside." "I can't." "You can." He stepped back, pulling the door wider. "Or you can go back to whoever's waiting for you downstairs." Her stomach dropped, he knew. Somehow he knew. She stepped inside. He closed the door behind her. The sound of the lock clicking into place was louder than it should have been. She heard the deadbolt slide, then a chain, then something else she didn't recognize, something mechanical and final. The penthouse was dark, not pitch black but dim, lit only by the city lights coming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a skyline she'd only ever seen from the ground. The space was massive. Clean lines, dark wood, leather furniture. Everything looked expensive in a way that didn't announce itself, the kind of wealth that didn't need to prove anything. "Sit." She turned. He was standing a few feet behind her, hands in his pockets, watching her like she was a problem he was deciding how to solve. "I don't want to bleed on your furniture." "Sit." She sat. He disappeared into another room. She heard water running, drawers opening and closing. She looked down at her hands. The blood on her knuckles was drying, cracking when she flexed her fingers. She didn't remember hitting anything. Maybe the railing, maybe the wall, it didn't matter. He came back with a first aid kit, a bottle of water, and a towel. He set them on the coffee table in front of her, then crouched down so they were eye level. Up close, she could see the faint scar along his jawline, the way his shirt fit too perfectly to be off the rack, the ink that disappeared under his collar and reappeared at his wrists. Tattoos, not the kind you got drunk on a weekend, the kind that meant something. "Let me see your hands." She held them out. He took her right hand first, turning it over, examining the torn skin across her knuckles. His hands were warm, steady, careful. He cleaned the blood with the towel, then unscrewed the cap on the water bottle and poured it over her knuckles. She hissed. "It's not deep," he said. "You'll bruise." He wrapped her knuckles in gauze, his movements efficient, clinical. Like he'd done this before. Like this was normal. "Your ribs." "They're fine." "Lift your shirt." "I said they're fine." He didn't argue. He just looked at her, waiting, and somehow that was worse than if he'd insisted. She lifted her shirt halfway, exposing the bruise already blooming across her left side, dark purple spreading under pale skin. He pressed 2 fingers just below her ribs. She flinched. "Bruised," he said. "Not broken, you're lucky." I don't feel lucky. You're alive, that's lucky. He stood, picking up the first aid kit. She pulled her shirt down, wrapping her arms around herself even though the penthouse wasn't cold. Thank you, she said. I'll leave now. No. I can't stay here. You can't leave. She stood too quickly and her ribs screamed in protest. She ignored it. I don't even know who you are. Min-jun. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. He walked to the windows, hands back in his pockets, staring out at the city. She watched his reflection in the glass. He didn't look tense. He didn't look concerned. He looked like a man who'd already decided something and was waiting for her to catch up. Who's looking for you? He asked. It doesn't matter. It does. Why do you care? You knocked on my door. By accident. Still my door. She didn't know what to say to that. She looked toward the door, calculating. 3 locks, maybe 4. She didn't know if she could open them quietly. She didn't know if she should try. His name is Eric, she said finally. My ex-boyfriend's brother. Marcus borrowed money from people he shouldn't have. Then he disappeared. Eric thinks I know where he is. Do you? No. Does Eric believe you? No. Min-jun nodded slowly, still staring out the window. The city glittered below them, 1,000 lights that meant 1,000 lives that had nothing to do with this moment, this room, this man who'd let her in and locked the door. How much does Marcus owe? 50,000. To who? She hesitated. I don't know, Eric wouldn't say. He told you to pay it. By midnight. Min-jun checked his watch. It was 12:17. You're late. I don't have $50,000. I'm a nurse. I have $1,200 in my checking account and student loans that'll take me 20 years to pay off. Then you have a problem. I know. Do you? She stared at him. At the perfect stillness of his posture, the way he held himself like violence was a language he spoke fluently, but didn't need to raise his voice to use. She thought about the locks on the door, the tattoos, the way he'd cleaned her hands without flinching at the blood. Who are you? She asked again. Someone who can help you. Why would you? You knocked on my door. That's not a reason. It is for me. He turned from the window, facing her fully now. The city lights behind him cast his face in shadow, but she could still see his eyes, dark and unreadable and fixed on her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. Eric is downstairs, Min-jun said. Probably in the lobby, maybe in the parking garage. He knows you came up. He's waiting. How do you? I own this building. The words landed like stones in still water. She felt them ripple through her, changing the shape of everything she thought she understood about the last 10 minutes. You own 48 floors, residential and commercial. I know everyone who lives here. I know everyone who works here. I know when someone doesn't belong. Then you know Eric. I know of him. And you let me in anyway. I let you in because of him. She didn't understand. She wanted to. She wanted to know why a man who owned a 48-story building would open his door to a bleeding stranger and lock it behind her and clean her wounds like it mattered. But wanting to understand and understanding were different things, and right now all she understood was that she was trapped in a penthouse with a man who looked at her like she was already his responsibility. I should call the police, she said. You won't. You don't know that. If you were going to call the police, you would have done it 3 hours ago in the hospital parking garage. He was right. She hated that he was right. Marcus got involved with people who don't forgive debts, Min-jun said. Eric is collecting because someone told him to. That someone doesn't care if you know where Marcus is. They care about the principal. $50,000 or a lesson. What kind of lesson? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I can't pay them, she said. I know. So what am I supposed to do? Stay here tonight. And then what? Then I handle it. You can't just handle $50,000 of someone else's debt. I'm not handling the debt, he said. I'm handling Eric. The way he said it made her skin prickle, not with fear, with something else, something that felt like relief and danger in equal measure. I don't need you to fight my battles, she said. You're bleeding in my penthouse. Your battle is already here. That's not how this works. It is now. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him she could figure this out on her own, that she didn't need a stranger with tattoos and 3 deadbolts and a voice like cold steel to decide what happened next. But the truth was she had no plan. She had no money. She had nowhere to go. And Eric was downstairs, waiting, and midnight had come and gone. Why are you doing this? She asked. Min-jun walked toward her, stopping a few feet away, close enough that she could see the details she'd missed before. The way his jaw was set, the faint shadows under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days, the way he looked at her, not through her, not past her, but at her, like he was cataloging every detail and filing it away. Because you knocked on my door, he said, and because Eric made a mistake coming into my building. What kind of mistake? The kind people don't make twice. He said it so quietly she almost missed the weight of it. Almost. Get some rest, he said, stepping back. There's a guest room down the hall, second door on the left. Lock it if it makes you feel better. Where will you be? Here. Why? Because Eric might decide not to wait until morning. She wanted to ask what he meant. She wanted to ask what he was going to do. But the exhaustion was catching up to her now, adrenaline fatting, leaving behind the sharp ache in her ribs and the dull throb in her knuckles, and the weight of 3 hours spent running from something she couldn't outrun. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. She walked toward the hallway, glancing back before she turned the corner. He was standing by the windows again, silhouetted against the city, and she thought he looked like someone who'd spent a long time learning how to be still in a world that demanded movement. She found the guest room, locked the door, sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands, at the gauze wrapped around her knuckles, at the blood dried under her nails. She thought about Marcus, wherever he was, probably on a bus to another state, leaving behind a debt and a brother and a girlfriend who'd loved him enough to stay even when she shouldn't have. She thought about Eric, downstairs, waiting. She thought about Min-jun, a man who'd let her in and locked the door and promised to handle something he had no reason to care about. She lay down. She didn't think she'd sleep, but she did. She woke to voices. Low, muffled, coming from somewhere beyond the guest room door. She checked her phone. 3:42 a.m. She sat up slowly, ribs protesting, and pressed her ear to the door. You're making this harder than it needs to be. That was Eric. She'd recognize his voice anywhere. Flat, mean, the kind of voice that enjoyed making people afraid. I'm making it simple. Min-jun, quieter than Eric, calmer, but there was something underneath it, something sharp, like a blade held perfectly still. She owes me $50,000. She doesn't owe you anything. Her boyfriend does. Her ex-boyfriend, and he's gone. Then she pays. No. The silence that followed was worse than the argument. She held her breath, waiting. You don't know who you're fucking with, Eric said. I do. Yeah, who do you think I work for? Park or one of his lieutenants, probably Kim. You have that look. Another silence, longer this time. You know Park. I know a lot of people. Then, you know what happens if I walk out of here empty-handed. You won't walk out of here empty-handed. She heard movement, footsteps, something heavy being set down on a surface. She pressed her ear harder against the door. That's $50,000, Min-jun said. Cash, take it to Park. Tell him the debt is paid. I'm supposed to bring him the girl. You're supposed to bring him $50,000. I'm giving you $50,000. The girl is none of your concern. He's going to ask questions. Then answer them. He's going to want to know who paid. Tell him the truth. And who are you? Min-jun didn't answer right away. She imagined him standing there, hands in his pockets, that same unreadable expression on his face. Someone who doesn't like messes in his building, he said finally. Park's going to want to meet you. He knows where to find me. More silence, then the sound of Eric picking up the money, counting it maybe, checking. This doesn't mean she's safe, Eric said. Park might not care about the money, he might care about the principal. Then he can call me. You're playing a dangerous game. I'm not playing. She heard the door open. Close, locks clicking back into place, footsteps moving away. She waited, counting to 60 in her head, then unlocked the guest room door and stepped into the hallway. Min-jun was standing in the living room, exactly where she'd left him hours ago, staring out the windows. The first aid kit was still on the coffee table. The towel was still stained with her blood. The money, if there had been money, was gone. "You're awake," he said without turning around. "You paid him?" "Yes." $50,000. "Yes." "Why?" "I told you, I don't like messes in my building." She walked closer, stopping a few feet behind him. In the window's reflection, she could see his face more clearly now. The hard set of his jaw, the faint tension in his shoulders. He looked tired, not exhausted, just tired, like this was one more thing in a long line of things that required his attention. "That's not a real answer," she said. "It's the only one I have." "Eric said Park would want to meet you. Who's Park?" "Someone you don't need to worry about." "You just paid $50,000 to his enforcer. I think I need to worry." Min-jun turned to face her. "Park runs money through this city. Loans, investments, property. He's careful, he's smart. And he doesn't like it when people disappear with his cash." "Marcus." "Yes." "And now Park knows about you." "He knew about me before tonight." She stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means Park, and I have an understanding." "What kind of understanding?" "The kind where he doesn't operate in my building, and I don't interfere with his business." "You just interfered with his business." "No, I paid a debt, that's different." "How is that different?" "Because the debt is closed. You're free. Eric has his money. Park has no reason to care about you anymore." "Unless he does." "He won't." "How do you know?" Min-jun stepped closer. Not threatening, not crowding, just close enough that she could see the way his eyes tracked across her face, reading her, deciding something. "Because I told him not to," he said. The words were simple. The weight behind them was not. "You told him," she repeated. "Yes." "And he listened." "Yes." "Why would he listen to you?" "Because I'm someone he doesn't want to make an enemy of." She felt the air shift between them, not with tension, with understanding, slow and creeping and impossible to ignore. "You're not just a landlord," she said. "No." "What are you?" "Someone who keeps things running smoothly." "That's not an answer." "It's the one you're getting." She wanted to push. She wanted to demand a real explanation, something concrete, something that made sense of the last 4 hours. But the way he was looking at her, calm and absolute and immovable, told her she wouldn't get more than he was willing to give. "I should go home," she said. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because Eric might have taken the money, but he's not stupid. He'll wait. He'll watch. And if you go home tonight, he'll know where to find you." "So I'm supposed to stay here?" "For now." "And when Park decides he wants to meet me anyway, when he decides 50,000 isn't enough?" "He won't." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I'll make sure." She didn't know what to do with that, with the quiet certainty in his voice, with the way he said it like it was already decided, like her safety was a problem he'd solved before she'd even known it existed. "I don't understand you," she said. "You don't need to." "I knocked on your door by accident." "I know." "So why do you care?" He was quiet for a long moment. The city stretched out behind him, endless and indifferent, a million lives that didn't touch this one, this moment, this strange intersection of panic and protection. "Because you were bleeding," he said finally, "and you didn't run when I opened the door. You should have." "Why?" "Because most people do." She didn't know what to say to that. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't noticed before. Loneliness. Not the kind that came from being alone, the kind that came from being feared. "I'm not most people," she said. "I know. What happens now? You sleep, I make a phone call. Tomorrow you go back to your life. Just like that. Just like that. And you. I go back to mine." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to think that tomorrow she'd wake up and this would all be over, that she'd walk out of this penthouse and back into her ordinary life, and Min-jun would disappear into whatever shadows he'd come from. But the way he was looking at her, the way he'd locked the door behind her, the way he'd said, "I'll make sure," told her it wasn't that simple. "Thank you," she said. "For the money, for everything." He nodded. "Go back to sleep. I'll wake you before sunrise." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Min-jun." "Yes." "If I'd knocked on someone else's door, what would have happened?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than before. "You didn't," he said. "That's all that matters." She went back to the guest room, locked the door, lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. She thought about the money, about Eric, about Park, about the way Min-jun had stood between her and all of it like it was nothing, like $50,000 and a man's reputation were prices he paid without thinking. She thought about the scar on his jaw, the tattoos, the 3 locks on the door, the way he'd said, "Because you knocked on my door," like it explained everything. Maybe it did. She fell asleep to the sound of Min-jun's voice, low and cold, speaking to someone on the phone in a language she didn't understand. Korean, maybe. She couldn't be sure, but she heard the steel in it, the finality, the promise of consequences if whoever was on the other end didn't listen. When she woke again, the sun was rising. She found him in the kitchen making coffee. He'd changed clothes, black slacks, black shirt. He looked like he was about to walk into a boardroom or a funeral, maybe both. "Coffee?" he asked. "Please." He poured her a cup, black, and handed it to her. She took it, wrapping her hands around the warmth. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "No." "Why not?" "I had calls to make." "About me." "About Park." She sipped the coffee. It was good. Too good. The kind of coffee that cost more than her entire grocery budget. "What did he say?" she asked. "That the debt is paid, that you're clear." "And he believed you." "He didn't have a choice." "What does that mean?" "It means Park, and I came to an agreement." "What kind of agreement?" "The kind that ends this conversation." She wanted to push. She didn't, instead. She drank her coffee and watched him move through the kitchen, efficient and precise, like everything he did. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. She could feel his attention on her anyway, constant and unrelenting. "I need to get to work," she said. "I'll have someone drive you." "I can take the bus." "You'll take my car." "Min-jun." "You'll take my car," he repeated. "Eric might be gone, but people talk. I want them to see you leaving here in a car that belongs to me." "Why?" "Because it sends a message." "What message?" "That you're protected." The word hung between them, heavy and deliberate. Protected. Not safe. Not fine. Protected. Like she was something that belonged to him now, something he'd claimed without asking. "I'm not yours to protect," she said. "No, but you are anyway." She didn't know what to say to that. She finished her coffee, set the cup down, looked at him standing there in his black shirt and his unreadable eyes and his quiet, terrifying certainty. "I don't even know you," she said. "You know enough." "Do I?" "You know I won't let anyone hurt you. That's enough." "Why does it matter to you?" "Because you knocked on my door." "That's still not a real answer." "It's the only one I have." He walked toward her, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him. He reached out, slow and deliberate, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered there for a moment, thumb brushing against her cheek, and she felt her breath catch. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "That's all you need to know." For how long? As long as it takes. That's not an answer either. I know. His hand dropped. He stepped back, putting distance between them, and she felt the absence of his touch like cold air rushing in. The car's waiting downstairs, he said. First floor, gray sedan. The driver's name is Jun. He'll take you wherever you need to go. And then you go back to your life. What about you? I go back to mine. Will I see you again? He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. If you need to, he said finally, I'll be here. She nodded. She didn't trust herself to say anything else. She walked to the door, heard him unlock it behind her, all 3 bolts sliding open one by one. She stepped into the hallway, turned back. He was standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching her with that same unreadable expression. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. Why not? Because I didn't do it for you. Then who did you do it for? He didn't answer. He just looked at her, and she saw something flicker across his face, something that might have been regret or longing or the memory of a choice he'd made a long time ago. Go, he said, before I change my mind about letting you leave. She left. The car was waiting. Jun didn't ask questions. He drove her to the hospital, pulled up to the staff entrance, and waited until she was inside before driving away. She went to the locker room, changed into clean scrubs, washed the dried blood from under her nails, looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She worked her shift, 12 hours, trauma cases and overdoses and a kid who'd fallen off a bike and needed 17 stitches. Normal, ordinary, the kind of day she'd had 1,000 times before. But nothing felt the same. She kept thinking about Min-jun, about the way he'd looked at her, about the money, about the locks on the door, about the way he'd said you're protected like it was a promise he'd die keeping. When her shift ended, she walked to the parking garage, stopped, stared at the spot where Eric had cornered her the night before. There was no blood, no sign that anything had happened, but she could still feel the knife against her ribs, still hear Eric's voice telling her she had until midnight. Her phone buzzed, unknown number. She opened the message. You're clear, don't go looking for answers, live your life. No signature, but she knew who it was from. She typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, she just wrote, Thank you. The reply came immediately. Don't thank me, just be careful. She stared at the message. Then, before she could stop herself, she typed, What if I need to see you again? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. You know where I live. She smiled. She didn't mean to, but she did. She went home, locked the door, made dinner, watched TV, pretended everything was normal. But when she went to bed that night, she thought about the penthouse, about the windows overlooking the city, about the man who'd let her in and locked the door behind her and promised her safety without asking for anything in return. She wondered if he was awake, if he was standing by those windows, staring out at the city, thinking about her. She wondered if she'd ever knock on his door again. She wondered if, deep down, she wanted to. 3 days passed, then a week, then 2. She went to work, came home, lived her life. But she kept the number, kept the message, kept the memory of his voice saying you're protected like it was a vow. Marcus never came back. Eric disappeared. She heard through a friend of a friend that he'd left the city, gone somewhere down south, and no one knew why. She didn't ask. She didn't want to know. Park never contacted her, never showed up at her apartment, never sent anyone looking. It was like that night had never happened, like she'd dreamed the whole thing. Except she hadn't. Because every time she walked past the building, the one with 48 floors and windows that caught the light just right, she looked up. And sometimes, just sometimes, she thought she saw someone standing at the top looking down. She never went back. She told herself it was because she didn't need to, because she was safe now, because Min-jun had handled it, just like he said he would, and going back would only complicate things. But late at night, when she couldn't sleep, She thought about knocking on that door again, thought about the way he'd looked at her, thought about the way his hand had felt against her cheek, thought about the way he'd said, "as long as it takes." She thought about the locks, about the tattoos, about the quiet, terrifying certainty in his voice when he'd promised her protection. She thought about the way he'd let her in and locked the door behind her. And she wondered if she'd ever feel that safe again. She wondered if she'd ever want to. She wondered if, somewhere in that penthouse, Min-jun was wondering the same thing. The city moved on. The world kept turning. And somewhere in a building with 48 floors, a man with tattoos and 3 deadbolts and a voice like cold steel stood by the windows, waiting. Just in case she ever knocked again.